This is honestly more people than I thought were going to be in here. I pegged it at 7, so this is a vast improvement. Alright, so this is the video game collecting, video game overview panel. You probably are wondering who I am. My name is Sean. I'm a man of many hats. I am editor-in-chief at Nintendo Enthusiast and PlayStation Enthusiast.com, which are two, one's a Nintendo website, one's a PlayStation website. We're actually merging into sort of an all-in-one platform. It's almost like a Reddit where people can contribute stuff and make money off of it, basically, based on views. So we're sort of moving to that business model right now, but for now it's kind of split. And I also do YouTube. I am one half of Nintendo Enthusiast YouTube channel, which has 21,000 subscribers. And I also have my own personal channel, RGT85, which is primarily retro stuff, but I do dabble in the modern a bit, and that's at about 13,000 subscribers in about a year and a half. So I've been very lucky, very blessed that those channels have done what they have done, because I'm not a great video maker. I use very basic equipment, and I'm just pretty much lucky. So for this panel, basically it's going to be like a two-in-one sort of thing. Basic industry trends, things going on in the gaming industry right now, and then we're going to kind of segue into the retro aspect and the rise of retro. That's kind of why this controller is here, because it plays into that. And then just a basic Q&A. I'm not going to drag this out or anything, so it won't be super long like the last panel that was in here. So yeah. Basically, the video game industry is in a really interesting place right now, because for the first time we're really seeing consoles essentially become PCs with the incremental upgrades. The PlayStation 4 Pro is coming out very soon. The Xbox One Type S just came out. And you're really seeing, it's not something like where with the PlayStation 2 you had the PS2 Fat and the PS2 Slim. They essentially did the same thing. One was just more ergonomical. These systems are actually better. They play the same games, but at better resolutions. PS4 Pro is going to upscale to 4K. You have the Xbox One Type S, which makes games run better that are Xbox One games. And it's really interesting, and personally, I don't necessarily like the trend, because console gaming is a convenience, basically. You buy a console so that you can buy the console, you can buy the games. PC gaming is great, don't get me wrong, but it's not for me. I'm not the type of person who likes to upgrade graphics cards and stuff like that. I use very basic computers. So you're basically tiptoeing that line, and I think that's a very dangerous game, because even if you look at Microsoft, you have the Project Scorpio, which is supposed to come out in 2017. So the generation gaps are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's becoming to the point of where it's almost as costly as a PC, but you're not getting the same benefits as a PC. These games, although the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One Type S will upscale to 4K, these games are not running in 4K. Because 4K gaming, it's not there yet. As much as PC people enjoy 4K gaming, that's more of a novelty thing, because you're still getting very, very sluggish frame rates. The current systems that are out on the market now, the PS4 and the Xbox One, even the Xbox One Type S, you're not getting 1080p 60 frames per second. Look at a game like Fallout 4. Fallout 4 was a great game, but the Fallout games, they're still buggy. They're still, frame rate dips. Both the Xbox One and the PS4 version would go down to the single digits at some point in time in the frame rate. So you were just playing like this chug game, you were like, it just, the generational gaps, they've been getting smaller. The NES to Super NES, you were amazed. The Super NES to the N64, you were amazed. PS1, PS2, PS2 to PS3. There was always a sort of wow. And then with the PS3 to PS4, Xbox 360, the Xbox One, it's not there. Because it's almost like we're getting to a point in gaming where the graphics are just, you're either going for a realistic style or a heavily animated style. And the heavily animated style games are the ones that end up looking better, because you can only do so much of realism at this point in time in gaming. You look at games that are yearly successors. Look at the WWE games. Those games have looked the same since the PlayStation 2. Like there's a few more polygons and stuff, but those games have essentially been the same sort of game since the PlayStation 2 in terms of graphics and gameplay. It's even crazier. But so kind of to supplement that, you have the rise of 4K and VR essentially. And VR, PlayStation VR just came out this past week, and it's interesting. A lot of people like to think that PlayStation VR is going to be, the future. The VR is the future of gaming. I'm not so sure, because to me, a lot of people, when they play a game, yes, you want to be drawn. A lot of people play games to be drawn out of the real world, kind of like how they watch movies, kind of like how they listen to music. You're playing as a character, but it's also the sort of thing you get home from a day of school, you get home from a day of work. You don't want to, sit there and put on a headset and then, the technology just isn't there yet. The way those things are going, there's still static images. There's still 900p output on it. So it's interesting and it's innovative, but you could say the same thing about motion controls. Everyone remembers motion controls. I'm sure everyone in here had a Wii. How long did you play that Wii? Exactly. Did you have an Xbox Kinect? How long did you play that? The PlayStation Move, remember the PlayStation Move? They were novelties. They were awesome at first, and it just ended up becoming this sort of, okay, I just want to use a normal controller and sit in front of my television and play a video game. And so I'm not completely against VR. I think VR does have a place in gaming, and it does have a place in entertainment. I think the entertainment aspect of VR is a lot more important than in the gaming world, because you're going to be able to, take these virtual vacations, places you can't go. There's so much more in the entertainment realm than what you're seeing in gaming, because the PS4, like I said, the PSVR just came out. Look at the games that are out on it, or should I say extended demos, because they're not full games, they're just experiences. It's just, I don't ever foresee virtual reality becoming the standard over the standard controller and TV, because it's just, and plus you have to remember the whole segment of people who are getting sick. There are a ton of people who get sick from VR gaming. A large website, Games Radar, they tried to review Drive Club VR, and they couldn't. Every single one of their staff members got sick, and that's like 10, 15 people. So VR is interesting. It's an interesting concept. It will definitely have a place, but as far as becoming, the standard, it just won't. Because at the end of the day, the average person that plays a video game wants to sit in front of a TV with a controller. Because if that sort of stuff was going to be the standard, you would still have the PlayStation Move. You would still have the Xbox One Kinect. Remember how they tried to bundle that at first, and then everyone said, no, get rid of the Kinect, it's cheaper without it. So, that's how it ended up being. But there is one interesting thing. Because there's one company that I haven't said a single word about, and that is Nintendo. What is Nintendo doing right now? Nope, nobody really knows. And that's a big mystery. You have the NX, or codename NX. Supposedly that's not going to be the official name, and you have all these rumors, hybrid systems. Or there's actually two. It's very interesting because working for a Nintendo site, there are actually two camps. There are people who believe it's a hybrid system, and there are people who believe that it's a standard home console. For the longest time, I was in the hybrid system realm. But recently, there's a really good YouTube channel called Super Metal Dave. He does a lot of investigative stuff into this. And it almost, you can make a case for one or the other, but at the end of the day, there's still that mystery that nobody knows what Nintendo is doing. And Nintendo has always focused, they've never really cared about super powerful hardware since the GameCube era. They've always recently have just been doing, more their own thing. But while that worked with the Wii to an extent, it didn't work with the Wii U. The Wii U was a phenomenal system. It has a great library of exclusive games, but without third-party games, you're not going to survive. So Nintendo is in a very interesting, I wouldn't say a make it or break it thing, because they're still making money. They have so much, they have, I think, 9 billion yen just in the bank. Like, that's just not including, operating assets, sales of games. That's just extra money. So it's not a make it or break it situation, but it's definitely a make it or break it sort of in the home console realm. What are they going to do? What should they do? They don't want to compete. But at some point in time, you have to realize that marching to the beat of your own drum will only get you so far. Like, you could be, and it's just like in life, you could be an individual, but you also have to adhere to society norms. You have to adhere to the norms of the real world. And I think Nintendo is at a point where they have to be their own entity, but also, you know, start to realize that you're missing a huge segment of the gaming market that, well, I don't care, because I thought the Wii U was a phenomenal system. There were so many, you know, Bayonetta 2, the Smash Brothers, Mario Kart. There were so many great games for it. You have to, in order to survive in the gaming industry right now, you have to have that third-party support. You have to have that Call of Duty. You have to have that Madden. I don't really care for Call of Duty. I don't really care for Madden, but I understand that they're system sellers. People want to play those games. So if you could combine those great first-party Nintendo titles that you know you're not going to have a million updates, you're not going to have, you know, buggy games and laggy games and single-digit frame rates, and get that third-party segment. It doesn't have to be every game, you know, but you have to have the heavy hitters. Like, Nintendo can do a lot, but, you know, that's going to be a mystery. But Nintendo actually did do something really interesting with the Wii U, and that's Splatoon. Splatoon, I remember playing the open fire demo of it, and they did like a basic, it was basically an online beta. And I remember being so confused by that game. I was like, I don't get it. Like, it seems fun, but I don't get it. But that game ended up taking on, you know, a life of its own, and it ended up being a huge seller. Japan just ate it up. It was huge in the States with the amiibo and whatnot. So it was very interesting. And what made it interesting was, if you played Splatoon, you know that the single player was, you know, basically a tutorial on how to play the game. It was kind of interesting, but essentially you were just going around maps doing what you did online. This was Nintendo's real sort of first online-centric game, and you're starting to see that a lot more in console games. That used to be just a PC game, or a PC sort of thing. Now, you know, think of how many games have just come out this year on, you know, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One that are online only. You got Overwatch. Overwatch has been a huge success, but that was an online-only game. You have to look, if you look back, it's actually pretty interesting. There was a game on the PS3 that was an online-only called MAG, and that was a full $60 release, and now it is essentially a coaster. If you go buy a copy of MAG, you can't do anything with it. You can't. There's no single player. There's nothing to do because it was an online-only game, and that sort of brings up an interesting point because whereas PC games, you know, you or I can make our own servers to keep that game going. And there's PC games from the early 90s that are still online. You can't do that on a home console. So eventually what you're going to have is you're going to have all these online-only games where they close the servers down, and then what do you do with that game? I mean, granted, it's not a big deal today, but, you know, if in 5 years you want to play that game again, you can't. And I mean, you might think to yourself, well, you know, who wants to play the same game again in 5 years? A lot of people do. You know, I've been playing a lot of, I recently just purchased Metal Gear Solid 4 on the PS3 because I wanted to play that game again. And I actually, when it first came out, I was very big into the online portion. I was like in a clan and stuff. I used to play for hours. That whole segment of the game is gone. That server was only up for about a year and a half, and then they took it down. Konami took it down. So, you know, I will love the single player portion, but it's a shame that how the servers, they need to, if they're gonna take on this PC mindset with home consoles, they need to do something to where you can create your own servers, or at least rent your own server space. These companies, EA, Activision, they have these huge servers, and you could do it on the PC, so why can't you do it on the console? It's, you know, it's really interesting. It's interesting to think about it for the future, and I probably should have made this a later bullet point because it segued really good into something else, but that's okay. Next thing, the rise of the digital marketplace. So how many people play indie games in here? Indie games, indie games, indie games, see? Indie games have essentially become what third parties used to be. Because your AAA third parties just pretty much rehash stuff. But why is that? It's simple. You can't take a risk anymore. Gaming development costs are through the freaking roof right now. I mean, you have to sell When a company like Capcom comes out and says, we need to sell 2 million copies of this game in order for it to break even, that's insane. That's either mismanaging your money or just, you're not doing what you need to be doing right. So you're seeing all these indie companies come in, and these indie companies are essentially filling that space of, unique experiences. You got games like Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight is probably one of the most successful indie games of all time on consoles. And what was really interesting about it is the digital marketplace in and of itself is starting to shift, because the popular indie games are starting to get physical releases. You have companies like Limited Run Games, who is based out of Raleigh, North Carolina, or Cary, North Carolina. I went and visited them not too long ago, and they are making a living off of taking these indie games and putting them on a physical form, because people are starting to realize, if I buy something on a digital marketplace, if the company decides to take it away, it's gone. It's just like there was the Simpsons game. It was on the Xbox 360 arcade. Now it's gone. You can never get it again. So what if I wanted to play it, You can't. So it's really interesting how the rise of the digital marketplace is actually causing a rise in physical games. And that's a good thing, because people say, game collectors, what's the big deal? Just get it on Steam or something like that. Steam is a great platform, don't get me wrong. I like Steam. But I would much rather have something I can hold in my hand. Because, if my computer goes down, my account gets hacked, is there really any guarantee that I'm going to get that game back? No. So it's very interesting how this has become, the rise of digital is starting to become also the rise of the small company, because now these companies can get their games out. Shovel Knight, I'm sure Yacht Club Games, when they made Shovel Knight, never imagined that they would be in a Best Buy, they would be in a GameStop. They were just making a game they wanted to make, and it sold so well, and the demand there was so high that it ended up putting it into a physical format. And that kind of also plays into what I like to call the rise of retro gaming. Because retro gaming right now, it's insane. It is insane how big it has become, and I don't think anyone ever anticipated this. I remember going to pawn shops. You would see NES games for $1. You would see, Super Nintendo games for $0.25. You're not seeing that nowadays, because people are starting to realize, I think, it's kind of a two-part thing. A lot of it is the, early 30s, late 20s crowd who want to play the games from when they were kids. And now that they have an income, now that they have, their own place, their own life, they can spend the money that their parents, either couldn't spend or, unless you were a spoiled brat, had everything. But I know I didn't. There was a lot of my stuff that I buy is stuff I either had as a kid or wanted as a kid, but, my parents couldn't afford it. So it's really started to take on a life form of its own. You have companies like this. I bought this today from, what's the name? Game Giant? Game Giant. They're based out of Wilmington. They have a booth in the far end. I bought this today. Now, this is from a company called Circa. I guarantee you that Circa was not a company 5 years ago. Why is Circa a company now? Because they're making controllers for the NES, the Super NES, the Genesis. Because there's a market for that again. These controllers are 20, 30 years old. They're not gonna last. Sega isn't making new Genesis controllers. Nintendo isn't making new controllers for the NES or the Super NES. So now there's a market for it. So it's really interesting how the retro world has taken a life of its own. There's cons dedicated to just retro gaming. There are documentaries, there are books. I'm actually a part of a Super Nintendo book that's coming out, I think at the end of this month actually. It's called The Complete SNES Guide, and it's basically a review of every Super Nintendo game. It's got myself, a bunch of other YouTubers in it, and we put it on Kickstarter, and we raised $26,000. People are very passionate about retro gaming. You have people like the Angry Video Game Nerd. They've made a living. They've made millions of dollars off of retro games, just talking about them, playing a persona. So it's interesting to see, and a lot of people thought that the bubble was going to burst. You know, games like Little Samson, games like Earthbound, that were going to go down in price. They haven't. They've gone up, if anything. So why is that? That's a tough question. You would think with the rise of repros that people wouldn't be as interested in collecting the original if they could get it at a fraction of the price. But if anything, it's just motivated people more to find the original copy. Because yeah, you can have a repro, but in the back of your mind, you're like, you're not real. You're not a real game. So, I mean, I own repros. Most of the repros I buy are usually like homebrew games, which is a whole nother conversation. But people really honestly thought that it would affect the retro market. People honestly think, they tell me, you know, they comment on my videos all the time, when the NES Mini comes out, it's going to be great. I'm like, why? Oh, the games are going to go down in price. No, they're not. If anything, they're going to go up in price because you have someone who gets an all-in-one device, and now they might be like, you know what? I'd really like to have this game again. I remember playing Contra when I was a kid. I want to go buy it. Contra's a $50 game right now. Contra's going to go up. I mean, it's as simple as that. Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3, they're going to go up. Legend of Zelda, they're going to go up. And it's just, eventually it will end. You know, everything comes to an end. I think, you know, 20, 30 years from now, we'll be singing a different tune. Everything will be, you know, dirt cheap. But for the immediate future, it's not going to happen. One of the most expensive systems to collect for right now is the Sega Saturn. I don't know if any of you guys play Sega Saturn. I love the Sega Saturn. The Sega Saturn was a phenomenal system. But prices are, sports games, Frank Thomas Big Hurt Baseball is like $10 complete in box. And it's like, that's cheap. It's cheap to find Sega Saturn games for $10 or less. If you see a complete Sega Saturn game, you're buying it. Why is that? Because if it's cheap, it's worth it. And there's actually a couple different reasons for why things like the Sega Saturn and the Sega CD are so expensive compared to the PlayStation 1. The main thing, of course, was system sales. Saturn only sold about 2 million in North America, whereas the PlayStation sold, I want to say, 13 million? Something. It was a sizable difference, but in Japan, the Saturn actually sold about 10 million more. So they had like 12 million combined. And so you have less games out in the market right then and there. Only 2 million people in the US bought a Sega Saturn. That means not only are a lot of those games probably broken, thrown away, hiding in an attic somewhere, but companies didn't make as many games for it. You know, as you know, they might do 1 million of a PS1 game, but they might do 200,000 on the Saturn port of it. So that's really limiting it. And it's really fascinating to see. There's so many Saturn games that are in triple digits right now. And things like Panzer Dragoon Saga, that was a late release for the Saturn. People are asking $1,000 for that game. $1,000. And it's crazy. Same thing with NES. You got games like Little Samson, $1,200. Panic Restaurant's I think Panic Restaurant's about $600. And what it really boils down to is nothing is worth anything. If I say this controller is worth $2 and I sell it for $2, it's worth $2. If I say this controller is worth $1,000 and someone gives me $1,000 for it, now it's worth $1,000. So it's all because people are paying these prices that you have this sort of insanity. And you know, to some degree, my rule of thumb is I don't mind. You know, people say I want NES games for $2 and I'm not paying any more than that. And like, that's just silly to me because if I'm going to buy an NES game, I don't mind spending $50 or $60 because if I go out and buy the latest Call of Duty, that's going to be $60. And I'll probably play that NES game, you know, longer than I play Call of Duty, like Felix the Cat. Felix the Cat is a great NES game. It goes for about $60 or $70. I paid $60 for it. I don't regret it because I probably played that game more than I played, what's a game that I bought that I didn't play a bunch? WWE 2K16. I played a couple matches on it, and I was just like, it's the same thing. So should these games be $1,000? Probably not. But the problem is that people just want the game that bad, and we have a system like the Saturn or the Sega CD. Well, the Sega CD is pretty easy to emulate, Sega Saturn is not. They recently, after 23 years, because the Saturn came out in '94, it took them 23 years. Is that right? Yeah. 23 years to crack that system. And now, will the prices go down? No. Because if that was the case, I could go out and buy an NES, something called a EverDrive, which is basically an NES cartridge. And it has an SD card slot. You put the ROMs in the SD card slot, you slide the NES cartridge into your NES, and it has every game imaginable. They only cost about $100. Has that made prices gone down on anything? No. So, it's definitely weird. It's definitely weird, and I don't think retro collecting is going anywhere in the next decade. Like I said, probably 15, 20, 25 years down the road, yeah, it probably will, but then who the hell knows what video games are going to be like anyways? Are they still going to have video game stores? Are they still going to have, physical products? It'll be interesting to see. And something else that actually, I kind of touched on this earlier with this controller, you actually have companies that are making old systems again. So, for instance, you take a look at the NES, you take a look at the Genesis, the Super Nintendo, 20, 25, 30-year-old systems. That hardware is not going to last. That's, not made to be played every day for 30 years. You have companies like Hyperkin, who make something called the Retron 5. You have companies, and, that's sort of based on emulation, and that's a whole other topic in and of itself, but emulation is not a bad thing. I'll talk about emulation a little bit. But you have something like the Retro USB ABS, which is brand new hardware made on an FGPA board, which is essentially mimicking the original NES board, except they put in a couple new features. They put in something like a Game Genie, an online scoreboard, 720 output, so all the games look great. And these new systems are, the Retron 5 is hard to come across right now. The Retro USB ABS, I know the guy who made it, he had his whole living room was just full of these boxes, and he sold out. And they're on Amazon right now, fetching about $100 over what they originally were selling for. And so, this also ties into the video game prices, because you have these clone systems that there's different levels of clone systems. Like you could buy an NES clone system for $15. I have one. It's called a Retrobit Entertainment System. And it just plays NES games. It's very simple. But someone's going to buy that, and then they're going to be like, oh, you know what? I want to play Mario 3. Oh, I want to play this game that I had when I was a kid. And what's that going to do? Make the prices of the retro games go up. So it's interesting how an economy has come out of retro games to where stores and other companies have made their living off of this. And look at the YouTube aspect of it. People like I said, Angry Video Game Nerd, Alpha Omega Sin, the Game Chasers, this is Metal Jesus. This is their livelihood. And of course, PewDiePie and Markiplier. I don't know those big guys. I just play online games. I don't really watch them. But I mean, it's just fascinating to me how people have made a living off of not just making video games, but playing video games or making new products based on old hardware. So it's like everything comes full circle. What's old is new again. Look at the rise of vinyl records right now, the rise of VHS, or the supposed rise of VHS. Has anyone seen that? Where people are starting to take the original Disney movies, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, with a big case, and they're trying to sell them for $100. And it's been going on for quite a while now. And the problem is that some people are starting to bite on it. So if you have some old VHS tapes, you might want to hold on to them for about 2 or 3 more years, because I think that's going to become a very, very big trend eventually. Because, like I said, what's old is new again. 30 minutes. All right, so, I mean, really, that's all. Let me talk about emulation a little bit, because emulation is an interesting topic. And a lot of people are very against emulation. It's ruining the games. It's everyone. You're taking money out of the people's pockets. Okay. First off, you're not taking money out of anybody's pocket by emulating an NES game, because nobody except a reseller, which is not a bad thing, but nobody but a reseller is making money off of that. Nintendo doesn't see any residuals off of it. If it's not a, if Konami isn't seeing any residuals off of it, so nobody cares. It's not, and it's unfortunate how Nintendo goes after these sites, but it kind of makes sense because they have their own little digital marketplace. But for the most part, emulation is a great thing because it lets you play a game. If you're gonna spend, 20, 30 bucks on a game, for an NES game, don't you want to try it out first? Like, isn't that why game demos are a thing right now? I know particularly, I played a game on the DS. It goes for like 20 bucks. It's called 9 Persons, 9 Doors, 9 Rooms, I believe it's called. And I knew nothing about that game. I wanted to try it out, but I didn't want to buy it for 20 bucks. So I downloaded a DS emulator on my computer. I downloaded the ROM. I played it for about 15 minutes. I said, sold. I'll buy this. Now, if I would have said, no, I don't want to buy it, I wasn't going to buy it in the first place. The only reason I decided to buy it was because I emulated it. So, you made money by me emulating the game. Is it really that wrong then? And the NES Mini that everyone's excited about, that's all emulation. It's not an NES, it's an emulated NES, a virtual console. It's all emulation. So people that there's a lot of people that are very against, Pat the NES punk is very against, emulation. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think it's necessarily right, or emulation can be a very good thing. It can actually, help you buy a game. So yeah, any questions or anything? So I'm on 2 YouTube channels. One of them is Nintendo Enthusiast, which is sort of a collaboration channel. There's myself, a stupid Canadian named Jason, and a couple other people. And then my personal channel is RGT85, and that's just, as far as upload schedule, pretty much every 2-3 days a video is going up, either a review, a discussion, collaboration, pickups video, because I buy way too much stuff. But yeah, so RGT85 is the main one because, all the ad revenue goes to me. What's up, man?
You mentioned Metal Jesus earlier.
Mm-hmm.
He has a friend. I forgot what his name was, but he actually has a black NES cartridge with Final Fantasy VII on there. Apparently, somebody turned it into an 8-bit game.
Yeah, John Riggs, the kind of tall, balding guy with glasses. Yeah, that's John Riggs. He's actually a good buddy of mine. John Riggs, I've actually bought repros from him, and he does that on his channel. He's actually kind of a little teaser. He's actually making me a video game. He's doing a sprite swap of an old Famicom game that never came out in the States. But yeah, he does a lot of homebrew stuff. He does a lot of, I bought Sweet Home off of him, which was a Japanese-only Famicom game. That's actually very interesting. If you've never played Sweet Home, go home and emulate it. And then you might want to buy it. But it's sort of the precursor to Resident Evil. It's the precursor to Resident Evil, but the battle system is like old school Final Fantasy. It's actually the first real survival horror game of what has become the standard survival horror game. So it's a very cool game. Sweet Home is the name of it.
I'm sorry. Does he take requests?
He does. I know he made me a game called The Fireman, which was that Europe? Where did The Fireman come out in?
It was only in Europe and Japan.
Yeah, which was it's a really good game. It was made by Natsume, and you're basically just going there. You're in a huge building, almost kind of like a Die Hard sort of thing, where you're like a skyscraper, and you're going through putting out all these fires. And he made me that game, and yeah, he does custom games. He actually hurt his hand a little bit, so he's kind of slow, getting back into the swing of things right now. But yeah, John Riggs, he's a super cool dude. His channel, I'll give him a shout out. You owe me. Rigged Games, RIGG 'D Games, and he does a lot of cool stuff on his channel. Yes, Mr. Konami, make Konami great again.
Yeah, I was going to ask with, we're seeing a big increase in Super Nintendo and Nintendo prices. And do you see, with people getting older, are you seeing N64, PlayStation 1 is getting a lot higher. And how long do you think it's going to be until we start seeing PS2 and Xbox One start raising up?
Well, the funny thing is, I have a friend, Neil, who swears, he's a bit paranoid, but he swears that he's starting to see it with PS2 games. And it's basically, based on, your age. As more people from the PS1, N64 era, I was 12, 13 around that time. So, of course, I want to buy those games again because now I have money to do so because, I have a job, I'm an adult. So once those, PS2 people, that are born in 2000, those kids are 16, 17 now. So eventually they're going to start wanting to play those old games again. They're going to want to start playing those PS2 games. Now, thankfully, there's an added benefit where, you can download some of them, which, PlayStation now, or what's the name? PlayStation Live, this is just, they have, PlayStation Plus, there you go. It has so much potential, and you look at it and you're like, okay, cool. It has PS2 games, they're upscale, and they have trophies, because some people really like trophies. Yet, look at the game selection. There's like 10 games on there, and like just the most random things, and it's like, what are you doing? And with discs, it's actually going to be a lot more interesting, I think. Because a cartridge, I have done terrible things to cartridges. Thrown them across the room, poured water on them, prayed to Satan that they would burn, and they still work. A disc is a lot more fragile. You get a scratch in a certain place, that game's not going to work. So, I've been telling people that are into collecting, if you're sort of the hoarding collector who just likes to have a lot of stuff, which I guess to some degree I am, right now is the time to buy your PS2 and especially your PS3 games. PS3 games are dirt cheap right now. And you don't even have to worry about pawn shops. You don't have to worry about eBay. You don't have to worry about nothing. Go to GameStop. Go to GameStop. As much as I used to work at GameStop, I was an assistant manager there. That is a whole other story. There's actually a great video, by far the most successful video on my RGT 85 channel. It has almost 160,000 views, where I basically just talked about how I worked at GameStop. And yes, it's not really a place, power to the players or whatever they say. It's not really that sort of thing. But you can get these PS3 games so cheap right now, and they're not bad games. You can get Metal Gear Solid 4 complete box for $5. That's a no-brainer. You can get a lot of games that went under the radar: Shadows of the Damned, Remember Me, Beyond Two Souls even. They're just dirt cheap. So if you're a collector, it's very smart right now to look at PS2 games and PS3 games. Because honestly, original Xbox I don't think will ever take off because there was no emotional attachment to the original Xbox. For one reason, there was never a game on there that you would really identify the system with as far as a mascot is concerned. Now, of course, there's Halo, and that's why people play the Xbox, because of Halo. Halo's dirt cheap. What else is there, really? There's some, if you look at, there's a great website called pricecharting.com. A lot of people say, oh, it's rigged or whatever, but it's a fantastic website. Basically what that website does is it's sort of like an aggregator of eBay sales and Amazon sales and sees what games are selling for. So that way when you're going to buy a game, you have sort of in your mind how much you should pay for it. And, if you look at systems overall, the Xbox is the system with the least amount of expensive games. The most expensive game is a game called Steel Battalion, because it has a controller that's like 3 segments, and you're actually controlling the mech. It's really insane. But yeah, PS2 and PS3 right now are the systems to collect for, because that is where you're starting to get to that age of people where they were kids then. Questions? What's up?
The Kingdom of Amer, the Reckoning game that came out, just for these retro games and things, do you think that as their popularity picks up again, they could bring back some of these companies that have gone defunct?
No, probably not, but you actually bring up an interesting topic that I could talk about a little bit. So you're talking about bringing back, the companies sort of that have gone defunct, like Acclaim, and, companies like that a lot of us, grew up playing their games, and, it's a shame how they've come. But there's actually now a whole nother market segment that's stepping into that position. I know of two companies. There's a company called Collector Vision Games, and there's a company called Pico Interactive. Collector Vision Games has actually acquired the Acclaim trademark, the Iguana Entertainment trademark, and they also have one more. And then Pico Interactive is doing the same thing. What they do is they find games that either didn't sell well or that were only released in one territory or weren't completed, and they complete them themselves. So what you're starting to see is these intellectual properties are becoming high in demand. So while it might not be the original companies, people are starting to carry on this tradition. Actually, Interplay, which did games like Earthworm Jim, Boogerman, MDK, what's our other big game? Interplay. Oh, Play Fighters. They are on the market right now, and all 70 of their IPs plus the Interplay name is on the market. So you'll never see probably those companies come back in a traditional sense, but they're starting to become a longing for those games and a longing for those IPs, not just spiritual successors like Mighty No. 9, Bloodstained for Castlevania, and things like that. Because let's face it, the original people, even if Konami right now made a new Castlevania game, would it be good? There's no guarantee, because the people that were there for the classics, Super Castlevania 4, Dracula X, Symphony of the Night, they're no longer there. It's just the name, it's not the actual people. So, and I really like that Collector Vision is doing things like that in Pico Interactive, because it's really just an interesting business model, and I hope it works out for them. I know some of the guys at both companies actually personally, and I hope it does work out for them, because it's cool to turn on a game and see that Acclaim logo, and it's like, I'm 10 years old again.